Welcome, my friend, and thank you for joining me this evening for another journey into the gentle stories of the past. As the world around us grows quieter, I invite you to ease into stillness and allow yourself to drift with me into history as softer shadows. Tell me, just for a moment, where are you listening from, and what time of day is it where you are? Isn't it fascinating to imagine all of us scattered across different places and time zones, yet gathered in this very same moment together? If these calming tales help you drift into sleep, make sure to follow along, because many more nights of wonder still await us. Now, picture this. You re-stepping through the echoing marble corridors of a palace so magnificent it would make Versailles seem like nothing more than a gardener-esque cottage. The air is heavy with clouds of frankincense and more luxuries. They cost more than most people earned in an entire year. Along the shining walls stand golden statues of gods and goddesses, their polished eyes seeming to track your every move, hidden in these sumptuous chambers. The greatest rulers of history weave together love, affairs so audacious and tangled they could leave today. Establoids, scandalized. This was a world where a single kiss might ignite a war, where marriage served as a political weapon more destructive than an army, and where the royal bedchamber was quite literally the most perilous room in the entire kingdom. These weren't mere romances or fleeting indulgences, they were deliberate seductions, power plays that reshaped empires and sometimes toppled them. And you may be asking yourself, really? Could ancient Egypt have been that seductive? Weren't they all just tomb builders and pharaohs obsessed with mummies and the afterlife? Well, get ready to have those ideas overturned completely, because what you're about to hear will change the way you see Egyptian history forever. This was the civilization that invented extravagance as we know it. For them, seduction was a refined art form, perfected over centuries in ways that modern culture can barely match. Tonight, I'll guide you through some of the most astonishing tales of passion, betrayal, and political intrigue that played out along the banks of the Nile. You'll see how Cleopatra captivated both Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, simply with her beauty, but with psychological tactics so advanced they would put modern dating coaches to shame. We'll step into the hidden chambers, where pharaohs indulged in their most private desires, and I'll show you how love itself became the ultimate weapon of conquest. But first, let's get a taste of just how daring things could become in these royal courts. Imagine Queen Nefertiti, one of the most striking women ever to walk the earth, leading a religious revolution that rattled the very core of Egyptian society, all while navigating a marriage that included rival wives, political bargaining, and intrigues worthy of a dozen Netflix dramas. Or picture Hatshepsut, the queen who crowned herself pharaoh and ruled for over 2 decades, wielding her wit, charisma, and sheer willpower to hold power in a world ruled almost entirely by men. These weren't women playing at power, they were visionaries who knew that in Egypt, politics and sensuality were inseparable. Every glance, every caress, every hushed conversation could shift the fate of kingdoms. The stakes were impossibly high, and the players impossibly skilled. And remember, these weren't primitive people fumbling in the Dark Ages. Egypt was a cultural and technological superpower that thrived for more than 3,000 years. They raised monuments that continued to puzzle modern engineers, practiced medicine centuries ahead of its time, and built a society so polished that their fashions, beauty rituals, and romantic customs influenced civilizations around the entire Mediterranean. So how did they do it? How did these rulers elevate seduction into an art that could move empires? The secret lies in realizing that the royal courts weren't just places of political strategy, they were theaters of desire. Stages designed with breathtaking precision to enchant every sense. Picture yourself entering the palace of Ramesses the Great at Pyramid. The moment you step inside, your senses are overwhelmed in a way that would make Las Vegas seem modest. Smooth granite floors glisten under the flicker of hundreds of oil lamps. Walls shimmer with hieroglyphs, outlined in gold and deep blue lapis lazuli, recounting tales of divine romance and cosmic passion. Every detail was intentional. The Egyptians possessed a grasp of human psychology that rivals what modern science has uncovered. They knew fragrance could stir memory and emotion more deeply than any sight or sound, so each room burned a different incense. Cedar for power and safety, lotus for renewal and sensuality, cinnamon for fiery desire. Lighting was equally calculated. Polished metals and mirrors reflected soft, golden glows that made every figure appear as though touched by divine radiance. And, of course, the gods themselves were woven into it all. Egyptian religion was steeped in sexuality. Their creation myths began with acts of divine pleasure. For them, intimacy wasn't shameful or hidden. It was sacred, a bridge between mortals and the forces that shaped the universe. Now, let's meet the key figure who essentially authored the rule book. On political seduction, Cleopatra, the seventh. Here's something that surprises many people. Cleopatra wasn't ethnically Egyptian at all. She was Macedonian Greek, descended from one of Alexander the Great's generals. Nor was she considered stunningly beautiful by her era's standards. So, how did she earn her place as history's most legendary enchantress? The answer: Cleopatra mastered psychological seduction. She understood that true allure had less to do with physical beauty and more with creating a captivating illusion that made others believe she embodied their deepest desires. When Julius Caesar first arrived in Alexandria, he expected to see a frightened queen pleading for Roman support. Instead, Cleopatra arranged for herself to be smuggled into his chambers, rolled up inside a carpet. The dramatic reveal caught him so completely off guard that it flipped the power dynamic in an instant. She wasn't the petitioner, she was the prize. From that moment, Caesar wasn't negotiating with just another monarch. He was being ensnared by a living goddess. But her brilliance didn't end with theatrics. Cleopatra was fluent in 9 languages and trained in philosophy, mathematics, debate, and politics. She could analyze Rome's legal issues with Caesar in Latin, pivot to theology in Greek, and then shift to trade negotiations in Aramaic. Without missing a beat, she became intellectually indispensable, the most profound form of seduction imaginable. And she managed all of this while balancing a political storm. Egypt, trapped between Rome's rising empire and its own ancient traditions. To her people, the pharaoh was divine. To the Romans, Egypt was simply a conquest waiting to happen. Cleopatra walked this razor's edge, preserving her throne, her independence, and her life. The palace where her romance with Caesar unfolded was as much a character in the story as either of them. Rising from a peninsula into the Mediterranean, the great palace of Alexandria gleamed with limestone walls that reflected the sunlight by day and glowed like molten silver beneath the moon. Sea breezes cooled the chambers even in the brutal heat of summer. But the true marvel lay in Cleopatra's private quarters. Her suite boasted a vast granite bath, perfumed with honey, rose petals, and milk, large enough to immerse her guests in an experience bordering on the divine. Above, the ceiling shimmered with painted constellations that rotated through the night, thanks to a clever mechanism of moving panels. Imagine trying to debate politics while floating in such a dreamlike, celestial setting. Every element was carefully curated to blur the line between reality and the divine. Guests left wondering if they had stepped into heaven itself. And in a world where pharaohs were gods on earth, this manipulation was extraordinarily persuasive. Royal feasts carried the same calculated These weren't meals, but spectacles of seduction. Ebony tables inlaid with ivory overflowed with roasted gazelle, honey-glazed duck, and rare fruits gathered from across Africa and the Mediterranean. Musicians played flutes and harps, while dancers blurred the line between sacred ritual and sensual display. The brilliance of Egyptian seduction, however, lay not just in luxury, but in bending perception. The walls themselves whispered myths of divine affairs between gods and mortals, reinforcing the idea that passion was not only acceptable, but cosmically sanctioned. Consider the radical reign of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. Akhenaten didn't just change religion from polytheism to monotheism. He used his marriage as the stage for cultural revolution. At Amarna, their new court, architecture embraced sunlight and open courtyards instead of Egypt's traditional shadowed chambers. Art depicted the royal couple kissing, embracing, and playing with their children, imagery so intimate it shocked contemporaries. This was deliberate. Their public affection broadcast the idea that divine love could be tender, passionate, and utterly human. Nefertiti perfected what we might now call strategic vulnerability. Unlike earlier queens, who seemed untouchable, she appeared in art, laughing, crying, gazing adoringly at her husband. This humanity made her relatable while her unmatched beauty kept her unattainable. She became both an ideal and an impossibility. Even their royal bedchambers reflected their vision, built around an unprecedented concept in Egyptian architecture: natural light. Unlike the shadowy royal chambers of old built deep within palace walls, and lit only by flickering torches, Nefertiti and Akhenaten's private quarters embraced the light itself. Their rooms featured wide windows that welcomed the rising sun each morning. They slept upon a bed carved from a single massive cedar trunk, its golden inlays sparkling as the sunlight shifted across the day. But this was no simple indulgence in comfort. In Egyptian belief, sunlight embodied the love of the gods. By uniting under the gaze of the sun, they transformed intimacy into ritual, elevating each kiss into a prayer, each embrace into a cosmic act that sustained harmony between the heavens and the earth. Yet if one ruler truly mastered the art of seduction as political strategy, it was Hatshepsut, the woman who dared to seize the title of pharaoh and hold it for over 20 years in a world designed for men. Her ascent shows just how advanced Egypt's understanding of power, gender, and persuasion really was. Hatshepsut's journey began with her marriage to her half-brother, Thutmose. Tua, customary royal practice meant to preserve bloodlines and prevent disputes over succession. When Thutmose died young, his heir was still only a child. Tradition demanded that Hatshepsut act merely as regent until the boy came of age. But she envisioned something far bolder. At first, she balanced symbols of authority carefully. She appeared in the flowing gowns of a queen, but crowned herself with the regalia of a pharaoh. Gradually, she commissioned statues portraying her with a ceremonial false beard, a hallmark of kingship, while still displaying her unmistakably feminine figure. She was not disguising herself as a menshi, she was redefining rulership itself. Her architectural masterpiece, the mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, was itself an act of seduction. Rising from the cliffs of the Valley of the Kings, it seemed almost to grow from the living rock. Visitors approached by a series of terraced ramps that forced them to climb slowly higher, their anticipation building with each level. By the time envoys and nobles reached her audience chamber, they were breathless both from exertion and from awe. Inside, her throne room harnessed the acoustics of the limestone walls so that her voice, when she spoke, echoed as if it came from everywhere at once, like the voice of the gods themselves. Imagine being a foreign dignitary, weary from the climb, dazzled by the architecture, and then hearing a commanding yet feminine voice surround you from all directions. But Hatshepsut's true brilliance lay in how she resolved the contradiction of her role. Pharaohs were supposed to be male, divine sons of the gods. She could not erase her womanhood, yet neither could she abandon the authority the role required. So she invented a new identity altogether: the female pharaoh, both masculine and feminine, mortal yet divine. A revolutionary blend of opposites. Her private spaces embodied this duality. She kept separate suites, one representing her authority as pharaoh, the other her identity as woman. The official chamber was decorated with scenes of hunts, conquests, and offerings to male gods. The more intimate quarters overflowed with cosmetics, perfumes, jewelry, and furniture crafted for social gatherings and private liaisons. Between these zones lay transitional antechambers where she could shift identities, attendants transforming her from ruler in royal regalia to elegant woman adorned with flowing linens and elaborate makeup. In the morning, she could conduct military councils as a divine king, and by evening she could welcome suitors as an alluring queen. This interplay between gender, politics, and intimacy leads us to one of the most fascinating aspects of Egyptian court life: the royal harem. To modern sensibilities, monogamy may seem the romantic ideal, but for the pharaohs, marriage was too politically important to leave to chance or personal choice. The harem was no mere collection of beauties, it was a diplomatic machine, a network where each woman embodied an alliance, a territory, or a faction. The harem at Memphis functioned almost like a self-contained city within the palace complex. Each principal wife maintained her own residence, her own staff, and her own sphere of political responsibility. But this was not a cage where women schemed for the pharaoh's affection. It was closer to an elite academy, where intelligent and ambitious women honed skills in diplomacy, negotiation, and subtle influence. Their days began with long rituals of beauty and preparation. Baths infused with rose petals and aromatic oils cleansed the body, followed by hours of cosmetic artistry. But these were not mere vanities. Egyptian cosmetics were both aesthetic and magical. The kohl outlining their eyes, made of lead compounds and antimony, was believed not only to intensify their gaze but to grant spiritual protection and the ability to see into a man's soul. The red ochre painted on their lips promised persuasive speech and unforgettable kisses. Even the colors of their nail polish carried mystical symbolism, each shade tied to specific charms or intentions. Afternoons brought intellectual salons. Here, the pharaoh's wives and concubines engaged in discussions of philosophy, politics, and strategy. Far from being passive ornaments, these women were active agents in the running of the kingdom. They carried intelligence networks, economic resources, and diplomatic ties from their homelands. A meeting with a wife might be as significant as an audience with a foreign envoy. When the pharaoh entered the harem, he was not merely indulging in pleasure. He was conducting state business in its most personal form. A casual conversation shared over wine could steer military campaigns. Intimate whispers in the night could shape trade routes. A romantic supper might determine the fate of provinces. Even the design of the harem reflected this dual function. Chambers flowed seamlessly from formal reception halls to intimate dining areas to private bedrooms. The furniture blurred the line between politics and passion beds that doubled as council tables, bathing pools that doubled as venues for confidential meetings, gardens with hidden alcoves perfect for sensitive negotiations, disguised as strolls. This fusion of pleasure and power reached its grandest scale under Ramesses II, who ruled for 67 years and fathered more than 100 children with his wives and concubines. His palace at Pyramesses was practically a city unto itself, a place where pleasure and politics were indistinguishable. Covering more than 25 kilometers, the palace housed not only the royal family, but also advisors, servants, musicians, spies, and foreign envoys. The harem alone employed over 1,000 attendants, from musicians and tutors to physicians and informants. Ramesses knew that maintaining this intricate web of relationships demanded more than authority. It required charm, emotional sensitivity, and an almost uncanny memory for detail. His private records cataloged every woman's preferences, family background, and political connections. He could greet even a minor wife by name, recall her favorite wine, or inquire tenderly about her mother's health. This was not simply Knesset, was deliberate strategy, a vast system of personal seduction that built loyalty on an empire-wide scale. Each wife became an ambassador to her homeland, each concubine a potential source of intelligence. The pharaoh's daily routine reflected this blend of rule and romance. Mornings began with formal state affairs. Midday was reserved for meetings with his most politically valuable wives. Afternoons brought lighter moments with concubines, where conversation doubled as intelligence gathering, and evenings unfolded into grand feasts that were masterpieces of social engineering. Imagine the dining halls of Pyramesses. Guests seated in small, intimate groups rather than rigid rows, so conversations could blossom privately while the pharaoh oversaw them all. The guest lists were carefully balanced. Perhaps a Nubian princess, beside a Mesopotamian envoy's daughter, and a high Egyptian priestess, all arranged to spark cultural exchange and diplomatic opportunity. The lighting struck a balance, romantic, yet clear enough for subtle expressions to be read. Performances of music and dance carried religious and erotic symbolism, reinforcing the pharaoh's divine aura while enchanting his guests. As the wine flowed and the night deepened, the gathering naturally splintered into smaller clusters. Ramesses might share quiet words with a perceptive concubine about trade along the Red Sea, while across the chamber his chief wife cultivated alliances with foreign princesses. Here lies the true genius of Egyptian seduction. It was never simply about physical desire. It was about creating an atmosphere so rich, so captivating, and so emotionally charged that the most powerful figures of the ancient world longed to remain within it. Pleasure was only the surface. Beneath it ran currents of psychology, politics, and power. Even the sleeping arrangements revealed just how intricate this system was. Ramesses was far from a careless monarch, drifting from one wife to another like some ancient playboy checking names off a list. Each romantic encounter he orchestrated was a deliberate performance, meticulously arranged to secure specific emotional and political outcomes. His private chambers weren't just bedrooms, they were stages, each set designed with different themes depending on the woman he was meeting and the kind of message he wished to project. For his most influential wives, the pharaoh reserved stately rooms steeped in authority and grandeur. These chambers gleamed with golden hieroglyphs, their walls recounting tales of shared rule, mutual triumph, and divine partnership. Even the bed placed upon a lofty platform carried symbolic weight, elevating the royal couple physically and metaphorically above ordinary mortals. In such moments, intimacy itself became a sacred state, ritual enactment of cosmic order meant to remind the world of their joint divinity. Yet, when foreign princesses or younger concubines entered his orbit, the settings shifted dramatically. Instead of formal authority, these chambers radiated mystery and awe. Murals of gods locked in passionate embrace covered the walls, bathed in soft ethereal light that gave the atmosphere a dreamlike, otherworldly quality. Visitos weren't simply entertained. Were enveloped in the illusion that they had stepped into the realm of the divine. Balancing these contrasting identities required immense emotional dexterity. In the span of a single day, Ramesses might embody the stern, commanding ruler, the tender, attentive lover, the shrewd diplomat, and the living god tasked with maintaining harmony between heaven and earth. Today, we'd call this kind of adaptability. Emotional intelligence a hallmark of visionary leadership. But Ramesses had mastered it 3 millennia before the modern world had the vocabulary for such ideas. Behind this art of seduction lay staggering logistical complexity, managing the expectations, resources, and emotions of dozens of royal partners while presiding over one of the world's most formidable empires would challenge even the sharpest modern executives. Each wife commanded her own household, complete with servants, budgets, and political influence. Palace scribes, acting almost like chief operating officers, maintained meticulous records documenting everything from gift-giving schedules and pregnancies to visit rosters and the shifting moods of each consort. They knew exactly which wife felt content, which concubine was drifting toward resentment, which foreign princess needed reassurance to secure her father's allegiance, and which ambitious woman might pose a political risk if not carefully managed. This delicate balance of passion and politics inevitably bred danger. For in the Egyptian court, every romantic gesture carried the seeds of conspiracy. A single kiss could alter alliances. A whispered word could topple dynasties. Palace walls themselves seemed to listen, supported by an intricate spy network designed to detect plotting beneath the veil of romance. The story of Queen Tai, wife of Amenhotep III, illustrates just how volatile and deadly these intrigues could become. Tai refused to remain a mere ornament in the royal household, confined to bearing heirs and appearing radiant at ceremonies. Instead, she carved out a role as her husband's chief advisor, gradually amassing influence that rivaled the pharaoh's own. Her private quarters turned into an alternative court, where discontented nobles and ambitious priests gathered to whisper about policy and conspire against their rivals. Tai's brilliance lay in recognizing that knowledge was the most intoxicating aphrodisiac of all. She built a web of female informants throughout the palace maid's attendants, and entertainers who carried back morsels of information gleaned during casual conversations. A concubine's offhand comment about her province's grain stores could signal a looming famine. A foreign princess's expressions of homesickness might betray her father's waning patience with Egyptian rule. This espionage often unfolded within the very spaces designed for pleasure. Communal baths, filled with laughter and idle chatter, doubled as intelligence hubs where gossip turned into strategic insight. Musical evenings allowed Thais agents to study dignitaries' reactions to subtle political allegories woven into performances. Massage rooms, where relaxation and wine loosened tongues, became fertile ground for confessions. Even the palace gardens, seemingly serene with their romantic alcoves, concealed listeners trained to catch every whispered word. Her own bedroom stood as a marvel of hidden surveillance, luxurious at first glance. It secretly contained compartments within bed frames for concealed scribes, mirrors angled for observation, and lamps casting shadows designed to reveal even the most subtle expressions. Tai's greatest weapon, however, was not her furniture, but her mastery of conversation. She could weave dialogue that felt effortless and intimate, while gently guiding her companion to reveal guarded truths. An evening with her might begin with light-hearted chatter about family, before drifting toward discussions of regional politics framed as innocent curiosity. By the time the conversation turned personal, her guests would be so emotionally invested that they unknowingly surrendered valuable secrets. Foreign emissaries often requested her audience, thinking they could manipulate her feminine sympathies only, to find themselves ensnared in the silken web of one of history's finest intelligence operatives. Even the rooms where she hosted these encounters were designed with psychological strategy in mind. Her private dining area featured murals of farmers harvesting, children at play, and fishermen casting their net, scenes that stirred nostalgia and trust, lowering defenses. Furniture placement encouraged semi-private exchanges that seemed secluded but were in fact observable. The serving staff, far from being simple attendants, were highly trained observers capable of recalling precise conversations while never betraying their role. Every detail was intentional. A servant's placement during wine pouring could ensure they caught a revealing remark about military strategy. A musician could alter tempo to mask or highlight moments in political dialogue. Meals were scheduled to align with emotional states, most conducive to disclosure relaxed after food, vulnerable in exhaustion, or open during moments of affection. Yet, Tai was no cold manipulator. She cultivated genuine bonds, nurturing relationships that provided real comfort and satisfaction while still advancing Egyptian interests. Her letters to foreign queens and princesses show warmth, offering advice on child, celebrating milestones, and sending thoughtful gifts. These were not mere gestures. They were long-term investments that bound allies through loyalty and affection. The palace itself played a central role in these intrigues. Sprawling across nearly 40 acres at Thebes, it was an architectural labyrinth designed for both grandeur and secrecy. Majestic audience halls capable of hosting hundreds coexisted with intimate chambers perfect for delicate conversations. Its gardens were a masterpiece of strategy, with maze-like paths fostering both chance encounters and discreet retreats. Hidden grottos allowed private negotiations, while flowing fountains masked sound and created opportunities for romantic meetings staged to appear spontaneous. Even nature was conscripted into politics. Flowers were planted to bloom and release fragrance at specific times, jasmine for passion in the evening, lotus for clarity at dawn, roses for calm diplomacy in the afternoon. Lighting, too, was a tool. Dawn's golden glow for new beginnings, afternoon's soft haze for serious counsel, and flickering lamplight at night for seduction and mystery. The acoustics were equally brilliant. Certain halls amplified whispers, others swallowed sound completely, allowing rulers and spies to choose precisely where conversations could or could not be overheard. This illusion of carefree luxury concealed one of the most advanced intelligence operations of the ancient world. Guests felt honored and indulged, even as they were being studied, catalogued, and subtly steered. Behind this machinery stood an army of specialist courtiers, trained in persuasion, archivists compiling personality dossiers of foreign rulers, and experts who could read every twitch of the eye or curve of a smile. Recruits underwent rigorous training in languages, politics, and human behavior, preparing them as effectively as any modern intelligence operative. Mastery of cultural traditions from far-flung regions, along with flawless command of social etiquette, was essential training for anyone expected to blend into highly veiled diplomatic circles. Yet the most grueling part of their preparation went beyond ceremonies or speeches. It was the mental discipline of maintaining inner balance while constantly maneuvering others. They were expected to forge relationships that felt sincere, even tender, without ever forgetting the larger web of strategy behind them. Their role demanded a paradoxical blend, to be genuine yet calculating, affectionate yet guarded, inspiring trust while concealing deception. Such dual existence came with a crushing psychological cost. Records from the royal archives reveal entire systems devoted to safeguarding their mental health. Operatives were provided with priests who acted as spiritual counselors, treatments designed to soothe stress-induced illnesses, and carefully planned retreats where they could step away from the relentless theater of palace politics. Even with these supports, the burden was immense. Still, this institution produced figures whose abilities remain legendary: men and women who could charm entire courts, rally allies, disarm rivals, and orchestrate political outcomes with They cultivated loyalty in one breath and pursued merciless ambition in the next, weaving pleasure and grandeur into strategies that altered the trajectory of civilizations. The innovations of these early masters of seduction outlived their own generation. Their approach to intertwining romance with statecraft shaped courts across the Mediterranean. Greek city-states adapted Egyptian traditions of political marriage. Roman emperors borrowed palace architecture and entertainment styles. Centuries later, European noble courts would unknowingly inherit customs that traced directly back to the Nile. Perhaps their most enduring contribution was their proof that human sexuality was not a trivial diversion from governance, but a force that could enhance diplomacy and intellectual enterprise. They demonstrated that desire and authority were not opposites, but when merged, could amplify each other to produce results neither could achieve alone. Today, scholars are only beginning to grasp how advanced these systems truly were. Recent excavations show that Egyptian palaces were deliberately designed using principles of psychology and group behavior concepts that modern science would not formally define until thousands of years later. Their insights into motivation, persuasion, and social dynamics were astonishingly ahead of their time. The haunting question remains: how much of this wisdom was buried when those dynasties collapsed? How many methods of understanding and shaping human behavior vanished with the fallen temples and forgotten chambers? What can be said with certainty is that the romantic courts of Egypt represented one of humanity's boldest experiments in uniting private longing with collective power. They built systems that honored both passion and duty, individuality and harmony, earthly desire and divine mandate. Their story stands as a reminder that love and authority are not eternal adversaries. They, together, create legacies that echo through millennia. In the radiant halls of their palaces, beside the ageless Nile, they composed the opening chapters of a saga about human potential that we are still piecing together. This union of intimacy and politics reached its height in the New Kingdom, when Egyptian pharaohs ruled lands stretching from Nubia in the south to the Euphrates in the north. Governing such vast territories required diplomacy more subtle than any army could muster, and the royal bedchamber itself became the hidden command center of global affairs. Imagine the immense stakes behind marriages that bound not only two people, but the destinies of nations. When Pharaoh Thutmose III wed a Mitanni princess, he did not simply welcome a bride, he absorbed a web of intelligence that extended deep into Mesopotamia. Her attendants were far more than servants. They were conduits of information, quietly relaying details about Egypt's armies, economy, and political climate to their homeland. The wedding ceremonies themselves served as dazzling displays of soft power disguised as festivities. Every stage of the ritual was a psychological campaign designed to overwhelm foreign dignitaries with the undeniable wealth and precision of Egypt. The bride's journey to Alexandria highlighted the kingdom's triumphs in engineering. Smooth, fortified roads, endless supply caravans, and military escorts that radiated both protection and veiled threat. At dawn, the rituals began in temples larger and grander than anything the visitors had ever encountered. The air filled with clouds of incense worth more than the annual revenue of smaller kingdoms, while choirs of priests recited ancient verses. Sacred animals processed through monumental courtyards that could host tens of thousands. By the time the vows were exchanged, Egypt's supremacy had already been engraved in the minds of all who watched. But the deeper brilliance unfolded behind closed doors. Private wedding traditions forged lasting ties, not just between spouses, but between entire families and political factions. Female relatives of the bride were ushered into days of lavish treatment beauty regimens, storytelling circles, and shared rituals that gradually immersed them in Egyptian culture. Far from being mere gestures of hospitality, these were carefully designed programs of transformation. A cautious mother-in-law from Nubia might enter the palace suspicious of Egypt's motives, only to leave as an enthusiastic advocate for closer union, enchanted by luxuries, philosophy, and faith, unlike anything she had known. Even the architecture of the bridal suite conveyed strategy. These were not simple bedrooms, but environments where cultures blended seamlessly. Egyptian artistry was interwoven with motifs from the bride's homeland, creating a setting both foreign and welcoming. Materials were gathered from across the empire: cedar from Lebanon, gold from Nubia, silks from distant trade routes, all crafted by artisans of varied backgrounds, working under Egyptian oversight. Each element was a silent declaration of Egypt's wealth and cosmopolitan reach, while ensuring the bride felt honored. Yet beneath the splendor lurked constant peril. Palace archives tell of assassination attempts masked as love notes, jeweled rings laced with poison, and seduction ploys designed to loosen military secrets in moments of intimacy. To counter these dangers, Egyptian security devised safeguards that would seem extreme even today. Royal tasters were trained not only to detect poisons but also concoctions that could make a ruler pliable. Court physicians developed ointments to block toxins absorbed through the skin, and even perfumes and cosmetics were scrutinized for their emotional influence. Indeed, Egyptian chemists pioneered the science of fragrance, creating signature blends for different outcome scents that bred trust in negotiations, heightened desire in seduction, or inspired nostalgic loyalty for alliances meant to last. Clothing, too, carried hidden functions, threads that shifted color when exposed to toxins, charms to repel hostile magic, and cosmetics infused with protective substances. The ever-present risk might have poisoned intimacy itself, yet the Egyptians devised ways to sustain both romance and vigilance. Their solution was what might be called layered intimacy. Relationships unfolded in deliberate stages, each granting deeper trust while keeping safeguards intact. A new foreign bride might spend months in a courtship period, tested in hunts, ceremonies, artistic collaborations, and games that revealed her temperament and loyalties. Observers noted how she handled stress, whether she honored traditions, how she treated others, or how she strategized in play. These evaluations, hidden beneath the veil of entertainment and education, ensured that every laugh, gesture, and glance became data in a larger calculus of security. The spaces themselves were instruments of revelation. Gardens with concealed vantage points, chambers with acoustics designed to catch whispers, even bathing areas that exposed secret weapons or charms. Furniture, mirrors, and art were all part of the machinery of observation. Despite such scrutiny, the Egyptians cultivated genuine bonds within this watchful world. Their genius lay in proving that trust and strategy, affection and caution, could grow side by side. Real intimacy nurtured not in the absence of danger, but in the mastery of it. Even under the watchful gaze of constant surveillance, love in the royal courts of Egypt managed not only to survive but to thrive. Palace archives record marriages and romances that endured for decades, proving that true intimacy could flourish even in environments of relentless observation. Foreign queens and consorts sometimes found themselves genuinely enamored with their Egyptian husbands, while still holding loyalty to their native lands. Pharaohs, too, were capable of developing sincere emotional bonds with their partners from abroad, all while keeping their political duties firmly in sight. To the Egyptians, this was not a contradiction, it was a display of emotional sophistication, so advanced that even modern psychology still struggles to fully comprehend it. The secret to this delicate balance lay in what could be called transparent intimacy. Unlike many later societies that try to mask the political realities of marriage, Egyptian court culture acknowledged them openly. They crafted ceremonies and traditions that celebrated both the personal and the political, weaving them together into a single fabric of life. Wedding vows spoke not only of loyalty between husband and wife, but also of devotion to each other's homelands. Gifts exchanged between couples carried dual meanings, symbols of love alongside clear affirmations of alliance. Even whispered conversations between lovers often merged private confessions with discussions of diplomacy, ensuring that politics and passion moved together in harmony. This blending found its most profound expression in the tradition of sacred marriages. These unions were framed not merely as partnerships between two people, but as cosmic alliances infused with divine power, meant to safeguard both emotional fulfillment and political stability. Couples participated in elaborate rituals that portrayed their love as a channel for the gods' energy, capable of maintaining peace between regions and cultures. The sacred chambers that hosted these ceremonies ranked among the most breathtaking architectural achievements of their time. Walls glimmering with gold leaf that captured and magnified candlelight, floors constructed from stones brought from every province to symbolize unity, and ceilings painted with constellations, situating the couple's union within the very order of the universe. These ceremonies were more than spectacles. They were carefully crafted psychological experiences, engineered to deepen trust, empathy, and connection. Rituals included meditations that encouraged shared emotional states, breathing practices that synchronized heartbeats and rhythms, and even physical postures believed to channel divine power through the body. The outcome was a marriage that was not just affectionate but strategic, bonding two individuals so strongly that they could withstand the immense pressures of empire building while governing as one. Daily life for these royal couples revealed how seamlessly romance and politics were intertwined. At dawn, they might begin with meditations to align their spiritual energies before facing the affairs of state. Breakfasts were intimate meals of exotic fruits, during which intelligence reports were quietly exchanged. In the evenings, they might review correspondence from foreign courts while soothing each other with oils and perfumes. Even their living quarters reflected this duality, spaces that could be rearranged from cozy retreats into formal chambers for negotiations. Lighting that could shift from soft romantic tones to the brightness needed for political debate, and decorative motifs that could be altered to honor the traditions of visiting dignitaries. The palace staff were indispensable to this balance. Servants were trained to recognize when a moment was private and when political business took precedence. They could arrange an intimate dinner that, without disruption, transitioned into treaty negotiations. Some even carried sensitive messages under the guise of routine service, ensuring the flow of politics without breaking the illusion of romance. Their training demanded extraordinary emotional intelligence. They had to discern when a marital disagreement was simply personal and when it was a coded diplomatic exchange. They learned to interpret gestures, tones, and body language, all while maintaining the utmost discretion. Servants also studied the cultural backgrounds of each royal wife, so that even the smallest detail of service could honor her heritage. Yet, balancing authenticity with security was the greatest challenge. Royal couples needed to feel free to express real emotion, but the threat of betrayal or attack meant surveillance could never truly cease. The solution was what historians might describe as invisible observation. Guards and servants were strategically hidden, watching and listening without intruding. Secret passageways allowed unseen movement throughout the palace. Certain attendants, while appearing occupied with daily chores, were in fact trained observers, quietly recording interactions. Even pets and animals within the palace could be conditioned to alert handlers if something seemed amiss. The architecture itself was an ally to this system. Rooms were designed with advanced acoustic properties, voices that seemed private to those speaking were actually funneled toward concealed listening posts. Some spaces created audio illusions, convincing participants of total secrecy while allowing security to hear everything clearly. Combined with these technical marvels were psychological practices that encouraged people to share willingly. Traditions of intimate confession between partners created emotional closeness, while simultaneously providing intelligence. Religious rites involved admitting fears and secrets to priests, many of whom doubled as informants. Meditation and dream interpretation offered further channels to uncover hidden concerns, all under the guise of spiritual guidance. What is most astonishing is how sustainable these systems were. Modern intelligence agencies often collapse under the strain of prolonged undercover work. Yet Egyptian court culture managed to maintain these practices not for years but for lifetimes, enhancing rather than damaging the well-being of those involved. Their genius was in recognizing that effective influence did not have to oppose genuine care. By creating environments where everyone's needs were truly fulfilled, the Egyptians ensured that political manipulation and personal affection could coexist seamlessly. This philosophy extended to training as well. From childhood, future servants and courtiers were educated not just in practical skills, but in emotional and psychological disciplines. They learned to read human behavior, adapt across cultures, and manage their own stress. They studied philosophy, early psychology, and proto-behavioral sciences. Most importantly, they were taught to find joy and personal meaning in serving a greater collective purpose. Service to the palace did not mean sacrificing happiness, meant discovering fulfillment in being part of something larger. The palaces themselves embodied this union of the personal and the political. They were homes filled with love and laughter, yet also command centers of international diplomacy. Gardens doubled as sanctuaries for romance and arenas for treaty discussions. Kitchens prepared intimate meals for couples, but also accommodated the needs of foreign envoys with different traditions. The rhythm of daily life moved from intimate mornings, through household gatherings, into public court rituals, and then back into private romantic evenings. Even the cycle of the year was carefully choreographed. Spring was devoted to courtships and alliances, summer to festivals and entertainment, autumn to negotiations and planning, and winter to private bonding and reflection. These cycles aligned with the stars, the harvests, and sacred festivals, weaving nature, religion, politics, and love into one seamless rhythm. The influence of these traditions did not vanish with time. Modern relationship counselors are rediscovering principles that Egypt perfected thousands of years ago. The art of balancing personal affection with professional responsibility. Diplomats today study these ancient methods as blueprints for managing relationships that are both emotionally rich and politically effective. The Egyptians, it seems, had mastered a timeless truth that love and power, when properly harmonized, could create a civilization unlike any other. The Egyptians developed methods for nurturing trust and sustaining international relationships that relied not only on treaties and trade, but also on genuine personal connection and rich cultural exchange. These principles, born thousands of years ago, still echo in the modern world. Even contemporary architecture and interior design are being reshaped by insights into how physical spaces can be arranged to inspire both intimacy and productivity, solitude and shared activity. What these discoveries confirm is a truth the Egyptians understood deeply. Personal happiness and political effectiveness are not enemies. Instead, they strengthen each other, forming the bedrock of lasting leadership and stable societies. Yet perhaps the most astonishing legacy of this ancient romantic statecraft lies in its revelation about human potential. The men and women of the Nile were not supernatural beings, they were ordinary people whose training, education, and opportunities allowed them to reach levels of emotional depth and intellectual subtlety that modern cultures rarely encourage. Their story raises a provocative question. Are the struggles we see today between love and duty, desire and responsibility, self-fulfillment and collective success truly inevitable? Or are they symptoms of cultural systems that have yet to learn what the Egyptians mastered how to weave these aspects of life into a unified whole? Along the eternal Nile, they achieved this integration with an artistry that still feels futuristic. Nowhere was this clearer than in their morning rituals, which were far more than simple routines of dressing and eating. They were carefully choreographed performances designed to set both the emotional rhythm and the political direction for the day. Imagine awakening in a chamber where the ceiling was painted to match the precise star map of your birthnight, a reminder that your very existence was tied to the cosmos. As the first golden rays of sunlight streamed through windows angled to strike hieroglyphs, telling the tale of your divine destiny, the room itself became an affirmation of purpose. Preparation began long before dawn. Servants moved quietly, knowing that every detail carried sacred weight. The water for your bath was drawn from particular points of the Nile at chosen hours when its spiritual power was believed to peak. The temperature was adjusted not only for bodily comfort, but also to induce mental states confidence, serenity, or alertness that would shape the hours ahead. Even bathing was a ritual of governance. Attendants trained in both massage and subtle inquiry relieved physical tension while gleaning delicate information about your mood, worries, or even hidden illnesses. They could sense a pregnancy or the signs of strain before you yourself were aware, allowing the palace to adjust political strategies accordingly. Cosmetics, too, were not vanity, but strategy. Every shade, every powder, every brushstroke was selected for a purpose. To meet Nubian envoys required one style of adornment, to entertain Syrian merchants another, and to preside over a military council yet another. Religious ceremonies called for entirely different forms of preparation. Even the mirrors that reflected your face were technological marvels polished to such perfection that they revealed how you would appear from multiple angles, helping you rehearse expressions and gestures before stepping into the day's roles. Wardrobes carried the same layered meaning. Clothing was more than decoration, it was an arsenal of psychological tools. The heaviness of a fabric shaped the way you moved. The colors influenced how others read your intentions. The jewelry signaled both wealth and protective magic, Dressing for a single day might involve preparing for a sunrise temple ritual, a midday audience with diplomats, an afternoon war council, and an evening of private romance. Each demanded a different projection of identity. Robes radiating spiritual authority, diplomatic garments balancing Egyptian pride with cultural sensitivity, military attire exuding sharp decisiveness, and evening wear creating closeness without diminishing royal dignity. The servants assisting with these changes acted less as dressers and more as psychological strategists. They knew which hues gave confidence during difficult debates, which jewels softened the attitudes of visiting nobles, and which fabrics gleamed most beautifully under torchlight. Transforming from one role to another required more than fabric, it required inner recalibration. The Egyptians mastered techniques to ensure each persona was embodied authentically. Breathing patterns were used to summon courage, compassion, sensuality, or authority. Meditation allowed rulers to summon emotional reservoirs appropriate for every encounter. Posture and movement reinforced these shifts. The stance of sacred solemnity in temples was distinct from the commanding presence in military briefings, which differed again from the tender openness of romantic settings. None of this was superficial. It was a science of human expression, a method of drawing upon the full spectrum of personality without fragmentation. Voice, too, was treated as a living instrument. Court training involved rigorous vocal exercises so one could speak in tones that inspired armies, soothed lovers, led rituals, or persuaded traitors. Each situation demanded a different cadence, and Egyptians understood how profoundly sound could mold perception. When all this preparation was complete, breakfast served as both nourishment and strategy. Meals were constructed not just for taste, but to enhance performance, foods to sharpen concentration for negotiations, to provide endurance for ceremonies, or to stabilize mood during tense discussions. The dining chamber itself guided the transition from private life to public duty. Lighting shifted gradually from the soft glow of dawn to the brilliance of day, while acoustics encouraged intimate whispers that slowly opened into larger conversations as advisors joined the table. These breakfasts were not idle social gatherings, but intelligence sessions disguised as casual chatter. Advisors shared updates. Foreign guests were subtly probed, and even servants noted body language and remarks to relay to higher authorities. Information from these meals flowed directly into strategic adjustments. A passing comment on crops could reshape trade terms. A remark about unrest could shift military deployments, and an observation about someone's health might dictate seating arrangements at an evening banquet. Supporting this dynamic web was a communication system astonishing in its sophistication. Hidden corridors allowed swift, invisible travel. Lightweight carriers and ingenious devices transported messages instantly across the palace. Trained birds sped urgent notes to distant outposts. Yet what truly set these systems apart was how seamlessly they blended with social life. A hand gesture at dinner could trigger military maneuvers. A jewel worn at a festival could signal diplomatic positions. The entertainment chosen for a feast might quietly convey warnings or offers to observant allies. This fusion of pleasure and strategy created a lifestyle where no one needed to choose between personal joy and political effectiveness. They were one and the same. Afternoons revealed this mastery most clearly. A diplomatic reception, for instance, might begin in the awe-inspiring audience hall, shift into the relaxed splendor of palace gardens, and end with intimate private dinners. Each stage had distinct aims and emotional tones, yet all flowed together in a choreography that advanced multiple objectives at once. The grandeur of the formal reception was its own argument. Visitors, passing through hall after hall of breathtaking beauty, were overwhelmed before a single word was spoken. By the time they stood in the presence of the pharaoh, they were already soft, already primed to recognize Egyptian superiority. Egyptian supremacy was never left to chance. It was performed, displayed, and reinforced through ceremonies, crafted to perfection over centuries. The throne room itself became a stage for psychological theater, where every gesture and every detail carried profound meaning. The pharaoh's grand entrance was timed with meticulous precision, designed to coincide with the natural play of light filtering through openings so that his appearance seemed almost supernatural. Courtiers and guards were positioned in carefully arranged formations, creating living tableaus of hierarchy, order, and divine legitimacy. Even the pattern of speeches and formal replies was choreographed like a dramatic performance, building anticipation until reaching moments of awe-inspiring revelation. Yet these ceremonies were only the opening act of a much longer and more intricate orchestration. Once the formal rituals ended, guests were subtly shifted into more casual areas of the palace, where the real diplomatic negotiations quietly unfolded. This transition from rigid public formality to semi-private interaction was itself a calculated strategy. By lowering the guard of foreign visitors, Egyptians made them more open to persuasion and more receptive to carefully woven proposals. The palace gardens where these transitions occurred were not simply places of beauty, but masterpieces of landscape psychology. Wind-in paths were designed to encourage thoughtful conversation, while fountains and flowing water created natural sound barriers, protecting private exchanges from prying ears. Seating spaces were positioned with intentions, fostering larger group discussions, others designed for intimate dialogues. Even the choice of flora carried meaning. Aromatic herbs and blossoms were selected for their subtle effects on human moods, releasing scents that inspired trust, relaxation, focus, or even romance, depending on the diplomatic need. Afternoon garden gatherings were never casual diversions, they were strategic operations in disguise. Conversations flowed with but Egyptian hosts carefully steered them toward topics that revealed critical intelligence, military strengths, economic troubles, or brewing political rivalries. In foreign lands, at the same time, each guest was silently assessed for their potential as allies, trade partners, or sources of information. The refreshments, too, were diplomacy made edible. Exotic Egyptian delicacies displayed agricultural abundance, while imported wines testified to the reach of Egyptian trade. Even the ornate vessels used for serving food were chosen to display mastery of craft and technology. But the true genius of this system lay in how seamlessly the afternoon encounters prepared for the evening's far more intimate occasions. What began as formal exchange in the throne room evolved into garden strolls where conversations deepened, and then into evening banquets where trust and vulnerability could be nurtured. This gradual descent into intimacy was one of the most delicate arts practiced in the palace. It required hosts with extraordinary social sensitivity, ensuring the progression felt natural, spontaneous, and even flattering, while, in reality, it followed a carefully planned sequence designed to achieve precise objectives. Evening banquets revealed the pinnacle of Egyptian hospitality. Tables were arranged to maximize conversational flow, and lighting shifted throughout the meal to evoke successive emotional states of relaxation, anticipation, and connection. Entertainment was introduced at calculated intervals, not just to amuse, but to punctuate dialogue and subtly reinforce themes of loyalty, prosperity, or divine favor. Each course of food was crafted not only for taste, but also for its psychological resonance, building the evening like a symphony of flavors and emotions. When the banquets drew to their close, guests were invited into private chamber sanctuaries of luxury that seemed entirely separate from the day. As political maneuvers, yet in truth, were the very heart of them. These rooms offered genuine intimacy while maintaining discreet systems of surveillance and security. In these spaces, final diplomatic bridges were built not with formal treaties, but with whispers, confidences, and bonds of trust sealed through personal closeness. The results of these orchestrations became clear with each dawn. Ambassadors who had once harbored suspicion toward Egyptian power often left transformed into advocates for closer alliances. Those who might have posed threats were softened into allies, and the indifferent were converted into active supporters. Importantly, this was not achieved by crude deception or brute manipulation. It was the product of Egypt's refined understanding that Host-like loud diplomacy thrived when people felt truly respected, valued, and fulfilled. This approach required immense patience and a long-view strategy. Egyptians did not measure success in short-term gains, but in decades-long relationships. A visiting prince entertained in his youth might rise to power many years later. Yet the warmth of his Egyptian experiences would shape his loyalties for a lifetime. Behind the scenes, record-keeping made this possible. The palace maintained vast archives tracking thousands of foreign individuals. These files were updated continuously, noting shifting loyalties, cultural preferences, personal interests, and political ambitions. Cross-referencing allowed palace administrators to predict how one relationship might ripple across many others. Such information systems were tightly interwoven with daily palace activities. A servant preparing food for a banquet might consult records to ensure every guest's tastes and dietary customs were respected. Performers were selected not at random but based on detailed knowledge of a visitor's cultural background. Even the choice of a romantic companion for a dignitary was made with careful analysis balancing personality, political symbolism, and strategic objectives. Egyptian courtesans and companions were far more than ornaments. They were trained specialists, fluent in multiple languages, versed in diverse customs, and deeply educated in politics and psychology. They adapted to their partners with remarkable precision, offering genuine companionship while subtly advancing Egypt's wider goals. Training for such roles began early and was lifelong. Palace staff were instructed not only in technical skills but also in emotional intelligence learning to read expressions, sense unspoken feelings, and cultivate authentic bonds without ever forgetting the broader mission. Career paths allowed talented individuals to rise from humble service into positions of immense influence as advisors, diplomats, or even royal consorts. Advancement was earned not merely through personal brilliance, but through contributions to the collective success of palace operations. This system created an environment of cooperation rather than competition, rather than vying against one another for power. Individuals found their fulfillment in roles that harmonized personal happiness with collective prosperity. The palace culture became a living proof that personal satisfaction and political strength could be fused into one sustainable model of civilization. Archaeology confirms the reality of this remarkable culture. The ruins of palaces still radiate the sophistication of spaces that once merged luxury with strategy. Temple complexes reveal how spiritual life, romance, and politics intertwined to form a uniquely effective court culture. But the most profound legacy of these ancient innovators lies not in their monuments, but in their demonstration of human potential. They showed that societies can be designed where individual desires and collective responsibilities reinforce each other rather than collide. Their achievements remain a challenge and an inspiration for our own age. They remind us that what modern cultures treat as inevitable conflicts between love and duty, pleasure and responsibility, personal joy and public service may not be inevitable at all. They may simply reflect societies that have not yet mastered the art of integration, as skillfully as the Egyptians did along the eternal Nile. And as each day in the palace drew to a close, this integration reached its most dazzling display in the sunset ceremonies. These nightly rituals transformed the palace into a living cosmos, where daily routines merged with divine symbolism. As the sun god Ra descended beyond the horizon, terraces blazed with the glow of hundreds of oil lamps, lit in precise patterns, their alignment calculated to match constellations and planetary movements. Foreign guests, gazing out over this spectacle, often felt they had stepped beyond the mortal world into the very dwelling of the gods. Preparations for this nightly transformation began in the late afternoon. Servants polished silver mirrors, not as ordinary cleaning, but as sacred preparation, readying them to catch and amplify the final golden rays of the sun, casting divine radiance upon all who entered. Flower petals were arranged into intricate patterns whose fragrances subtly guided moods and emotions. Even the kitchens became temples of transformation, where meals were crafted according to philosophies that blended nutrition with mysticism. Exotic spices gathered from across the known world were combined in recipes refined over centuries, intended not merely to nourish the body but to elevate the spirit. The evening feasts of the Egyptian court were not merely meals, they were elaborate theatrical productions designed to captivate every sense and shape the psychology of those in attendance. The dining chambers themselves stood as masterpieces of sensory engineering. Tables were not ordinary furniture but massive works of art, often carved from single blocks of rare wood that had been carefully seasoned with aromatic oils for decades before being shaped by master artisans. Each chair was positioned with scientific precision to encourage natural conversation while ensuring that every participant was both visible and heard, amplifying the sense of inclusion and prestige. Even the utensils carried layers of meaning. They were crafted from symbolic metals and stones, chosen as much for their ritual significance as for their practical use. The flow of the meal was itself a choreographed sequence. Early courses tended to be light, perhaps delicate appetizers served on vessels of gleaming silver or gold, accompanied by soft music that lulled guests into openness and relaxation. As the evening unfolded, The foods became richer and more complex, the vessels more ornate, and the entertainment increasingly bold and emotional crescendo, carefully timed to align with pivotal moments of revelation or decision-making. A bitty detail, from the order of the courses to the interludes between them, was designed to create spaces for private exchanges, subtle negotiations, and whispered promises. The progression of flavors and music wasn't to random indulgence. It was a form of psychological architecture that guided guests deeper into the heart of Egyptian diplomacy. Wines played an especially important role in this delicate dance. Stored in underground limestone chambers that maintained precise temperatures, Egypt's wine collections were ancient marvels of both engineering and connoisseurship. But to the court, these wines were not just beverages, they were repositories of emotion, bottled tools of persuasion. Different vintages were carefully selected for their ability to alter mood, soften suspicion, and inspire confidence. A banquet meant to convert rivals into partners might begin with light, sweet wines that warmed the spirit and fostered friendliness, before progressing to darker, more complex vintages that encouraged reflective dialogue. Rare ceremonial wines, offered at the evening's climax, provided participants with a sense of transcendence, leaving them with a feeling of shared destiny. Music and performance formed the other half of this ancient art. Court musicians were more than entertainers. They were emotional engineers who understood precisely how rhythms and harmonies could influence thought and behavior. A single night's program might shift from stirring hymns that inspired bravery to gentle melodies designed to awaken romance, to philosophical tones that opened the mind to abstract dialogue. Meanwhile, dancers performed choreographies rich with symbolism. Their movements were not only beautiful but layered with messages. A dance uniting desert and river could echo themes of political unity. A tale of love between gods and mortals could prepare minds for romantic encounters that awaited after dinner. Every performance doubled as intelligence work. A guest's reaction to certain songs or stories could betray their deepest values, cultural touchstones, or vulnerabilities. Who they chose as a companion for a dance, who laughed, who frowned, every detail became data, quietly noted by sharp-eyed observers. Even the architecture of the performance spaces was designed to maximize this dual purpose. Movable stages that could shift ambience, seating layouts that encouraged intimacy without sacrificing surveillance, and acoustics that allowed performers to be clearly heard while still leaving space for private side conversations. As the evening naturally transitioned from communal entertainment to smaller gatherings, the palace's architecture subtly guided the flow. Large halls led to intimate chambers, which opened into private gardens, and finally, 2 secluded rooms. Guests felt as if they were moving freely by choice, yet the progression had been meticulously planned. These private quarters were not ordinary bedrooms, but temples of intimacy, sanctuaries designed to blur the line between human passion and divine mystery. Lighting shifted in carefully measured phases, first the golden warmth of sunset, then the cool serenity of moonlight, followed by the soft blush of dawn, an emotional cycle that mirrored the rhythms of love and trust. Furniture, too, carried meaning. Beds functioned as sacred altars for human connection, while chairs and couches allowed conversation to shift naturally into intimacy. Storage containers overflowed with perfumes, oils, and jewelry, each meant to enhance both pleasure and ritual preparation. Textiles completed the atmosphere. Silks from distant lands, smooth as flowing water, and infused with exotic scents. Linens grown in temple fields and blessed by priests. Fabrics dyed with pigments believed to hold mystical properties. Every choice was deliberate, ensuring that intimacy felt both genuine and sacred. The morning that followed these nights of orchestrated romance was treated with equal care. Egyptians understood that the transition from private intimacy back to public duty required delicacy. Bathing spaces and dressing rooms helped guests recompose themselves physically and emotionally. Attendants, trained in what could only be described as early forms of therapeutic hospitality, provided comfort and reassurance while discreetly gathering intelligence. A gentle conversation over scented teas or refreshing fruit could yield more insight than a formal interrogation. Breakfast itself was an extension of diplomacy. Exotic fruits offered clarity and vigor, herbal teas restored balance, and light dishes eased the body into the demands of a new day. The seating, lighting, and even the sequence of service prepared participants to shift from tenderness to strategy without feeling manipulated. Guests left, not with the sense of having been used, but with the impression that they had been cared for, valued, and welcomed into a relationship that was as personal as it was political. The information gathered during these morning after sessions was often the most precious of all. Emotional vulnerability made confidences flow easily, and the bonds forged in intimacy often translated into political commitments. Yet what made Egyptian palace culture extraordinary was its refusal to reduce these encounters to cold manipulation. The bonds were genuine, the emotions real, and it was precisely this authenticity that gave the diplomacy its power. Former lovers and friends who returned home carried with them not just memories of strategy but of affection, and those emotions could influence politics. For decades, palace administrators tracked these connections with astonishing records, cataloged every significant relationship, monitoring their evolution and noting their political potential. Correspondence disguised as love letters carried encrypted messages, while gift exchanges maintained both personal affection and diplomatic ties. Networks of former guests became living channels of Egyptian influence across the ancient world, ensuring that even long after the feasts and romances ended, the echoes of Egyptian hospitality continued to shape decisions in distant courts. Every element of these operations was deliberately crafted, even down to the choice of who delivered the messages. Couriers weren't selected at random. They were chosen for their ability to carry subtle emotional undertones and delicate political signals that ink and parchment could never fully capture. Inside the palace workshops, artisans and planners worked together to create diplomatic tokens of affection that were both dazzling feats of craftsmanship and instruments of psychological persuasion. Necklaces or rings might be designed not only to recall an intimate private memory between sender and receiver, but also to transmit coded political meanings, recognizable to anyone fluent in the symbolic language of Egyptian court culture. Perfumes were blended in ways that could stir forgotten emotions, while also demonstrating Egypt's mastery of chemistry to foreign dignitaries. Even garments and woven textiles served dual purposes, sustaining bonds of romance, while presenting a living showcase of Egypt's artistic refinement and technological dominance. The rhythm of these long-term romantic diplomatic exchanges was not arbitrary. They were carefully synchronized with the natural and cultural cycles that governed life across the ancient world. Gifts in spring would arrive just as planting and renewal rituals began, ensuring emotional and political impact during times of hope and new beginnings. Summer letters and treasures often coincided with the planning of military campaigns, designed to sway decisions before armies marched. In autumn, messages were sent to influence negotiations over harvests and trade. Winter communications, by contrast, carried warmth and comfort, maintaining loyalty during the darkest and most politically dangerous season of the year. Behind all of this was a system of training as advanced and intricate as anything found in today's diplomatic academies. Palace trainees were taught how to project genuine emotion while still keeping their strategic objectives clear. They mastered cross-cultural communication, learning how to sustain intimacy across long distances. What we might now describe as early psychology and behavioral science was studied in detail, so they could manage relationships with greater precision and insight. Perhaps the most striking feature of this education was its emphasis on personal growth and emotional awareness. Egyptian palace culture understood that those who lived balanced, fulfilling lives could better create joy and satisfaction in others. The romantic agents and diplomatic courtiers did not have to sacrifice their own happiness for the sake of state policy. Rather, the system encouraged them to integrate their personal desires with Egypt's larger needs. Career advancement rewarded not only loyalty and skill, but also authenticity and emotional intelligence. A talented individual could begin in humble service, yet rise to positions of immense influence, trusted advisor, cultural envoy, or even companion to the pharaoh. Their retirement system was equally forward-thinking. Those who dedicated their lives to these arts were honored with estates and pensions that allowed them to enjoy comfort while still contributing through intelligence gathering or advisory roles. Their knowledge and connections remained valuable, ensuring their service to Egypt endured beyond their most active years. The influence of this ancient experiment in weaving love into diplomacy continues to echo across time. Modern relationship counselors are rediscovering methods of maintaining long-distance intimacy that Egyptians had already perfected on the banks of the Nile. Today's diplomatic corps study ancient strategies for building trust and sustaining alliances through personal bonds and cultural exchange. Even contemporary hospitality and entertainment industries draw inspiration from how environments and rituals were designed to align personal pleasure with collective purpose. The timeless principle that private affection and public responsibility can reinforce one another remains a powerful guide for leadership, diplomacy, and social organization. Archaeological excavations continue to uncover the infrastructure that supported this remarkable system. Palaces reveal architecture built not just for grandeur, but with an intuitive grasp of human psychology and social dynamics. Masterpieces of art display the refined aesthetic that made Egypt's courts magnetic to foreigners. Even ordinary household objects show how deeply these values were embedded in daily life. But perhaps the greatest legacy of this romantic diplomacy is the proof that human beings can create institutions that honor both private longing and collective obligation. Lawanduti, pleasure and responsibility. Individual happiness and societal contribution. These were not seen as but as harmonies achievable through creativity, wisdom, and a commitment to human potential. The same evening stars that once shone upon whispered secrets in the palace halls still gleam over the ruins of Memphis and Thebes. They stand as silent witnesses to a society that found ways to blend intimacy with power, shaping history not only through monuments of stone but through delicate threads of human connection. Their story reminds us that the search for balance in our own world may be advanced not only by studying their temples and pyramids, but also by learning from their artistry and relationships and social cohesion. The golden corridors once echoed with soft conversations, intimate moments that redirected the fate of kingdoms, and romances that built and toppled empires. These dramas testified that love, when elevated into an art form and joined with wisdom, can become one of humanity's greatest instruments for building civilizations that endure not only in architecture or artifacts, but in memory itself. The dawn routines of these courtiers and royals were themselves elaborate, rivaling or even surpassing modern luxuries. Imagine awakening in chambers where the air was gently perfumed throughout the night. Carefully chosen blends of resins and blossoms, each calculated to enhance natural allure. The transition from sleep was never abrupt. It unfolded like a ceremony, guiding the sleeper from dreamscapes into a reality equally enchanting. Royal architects positioned sleeping quarters to capture the rising sun at exact angles, so light would spread softly across the room, acting as a cosmic alarm aligned with rhythms of nature. These 1. Timir engineering kit was spiritual choreography meant to amplify charisma and sharpen judgment for the day ahead. Even the beddings served hidden purposes. Linens woven so finely they seemed spun from moonlight caressed the skin, their dyes chosen with knowledge of how colors influence emotions. Blue conveyed wisdom and authority, crimson awakened passion and boldness, and yellow reflected prosperity and divine blessing. Cushions filled with herbs released subtle fragrances all night. Lavender to calm, rose to charm, and exotic spices to heighten clarity of mind and allure. Servants trained in the art of therapeutic hospitality knew exactly when the sleeper stirred. They ensured the first sounds of waking were never harsh, but soft music drifting from nearby chambers, carefully composed to guide the mind into chosen states-harp notes for peace, flute melodies for creativity, and drums for strength. Morning drinks, too, were crafted with intention. Herbal infusions timed 2 lunar cycles, juices pressed to sharpen vitality, and sacred waters believed to carry divine blessings. Even the vessels mattered, made of stones or metals thought to magnify the effects of what they contained. Finally, the morning baths were temples in themselves, sanctuaries, where the body was transformed into something worthy of divine presence. Pools carved from rare stones, waters purified through crystals and oils, and blessings from priests combined physical renewal with spiritual preparation. Additives varied with the day's demands. Rose oil and pearl powder for charm at diplomatic councils, or sharper ingredients for mental clarity in military councils. These daily rituals were not luxuries. They were essential instruments in Egypt's blending of love, politics, and power, depending on the purpose of the day, whether it was negotiations, warfare, or private intimacy. The mixtures of herbs and minerals added to the bath were carefully tailored. Some blends were meant to sharpen memory and promote steady emotions, while others heightened sensual awareness or deepened receptivity in moments of romance. The act of bathing itself was not simply about washing the body. It was a meticulously choreographed ritual designed to harmonize mind, body, and spirit. Skilled attendants administered massages that dissolved tension but also stimulated energy centers that Egyptian healers believed influenced both emotional balance and mental clarity. These sessions were not indulgent luxuries. They were advanced therapeutic practices, grounded in generations of knowledge about the human condition. The oils and ointments used in these treatments were triumphs of ancient cosmetic alchemy, refined through centuries of experimentation. Each formula had a distinct purpose, whether nourishing the skin, projecting alluring scents, or shielding the body against environmental and mystical harm. Some perfumed oils released a subtle fragrance throughout the day, drawing others closer while quietly protecting the wearer. Other aromatic balms were believed to boost the natural production of attraction while simultaneously warding off unseen dangers. Even the mirrors used in these morning rites were far more than reflective glass. Polished to flawless clarity and carefully angled, they offered the most flattering view of the self, while still allowing scrutiny of every detail. Yet, their purpose extended beyond vanity. They were tools for rehearsing expressions, testing gestures, and practicing the body language necessary for upcoming social and political encounters. Standing before these mirrors, one did not merely prepare outward appearance. One crafted the persona needed to navigate the shifting world of palace intrigue. The application of cosmetics that followed was perhaps the most complex stage of preparation. These treatments went far beyond enhancing beauty. They were tactical operations, employing color, texture, and symbolism to create deliberate psychological effects. The celebrated kohl eyeliner of Egypt was no simple adornment. It projected dominance and mystery while also believed to offer magical defense against illness and hostile energies. Its antimony compounds intensified the gaze, making every glance unforgettable. Likewise, the selection of eyeshadow hues followed an ancient science of color psychology. Greens for vitality, blues for divinity, and golds for radiance, each chosen for its power to sway the hearts and minds of observers. Lip pigments were equally layered in meaning. Red ochre, combined with botanical extracts, painted an alluring mouth, while also acting as natural sunblock and a safeguard against dryness. Fragrant balms sweetened the breath and, according to belief, imbued words with greater persuasive force. Even nails were not neglected. Henna patterns served as both decoration and protection, their antimicrobial qualities reinforcing their sacred aura. Gold and silver inlays reflected light during gestures, drawing the eye to graceful motions, while scented oils turned even a flick of the hand into a sensory experience for those nearby. Hairdressing completed the metamorphosis. Palace stylists were more than artisans. They were designers of identity and guardians of security. Wigs and elaborate hairpieces did more than captivate the eye. They could conceal small tools, secret notes, or even weapons, turning a coiffure into a silent arsenal. Jewelry, chosen with equal precision, was not random ornament, but a coded language of status, protection, and power. Necklaces and collars dazzled with gems thought to enhance memory or calm emotions, while metalwork reflected light in ways that made the wearer glow with divine authority. Every detail, from the weight of a chain to the height of a headdress, was planned to improve posture, enhance aura, and project command. Rings and bracelets, too, were multi-purpose. A signet ring sealed documents, yet doubled as an amulet of protection. Bracelets sometimes held aromatic compounds that released scent with body heat, ensuring the wearer left behind a subtle trail of presence. Decorative chains might conceal tools of survival, ready for use in emergencies. Clothing itself was treated as armor of influence. Choosing the day's wardrobe was less about fashion and strategy. Each textile was matched to the day's tasks and audiences. Silk garments created flowing movements that radiated elegance. Linen spoke of calm competence in Egypt's heat, while rare furs or exotic feathers demonstrated the kingdom's vast trade networks. Colors were chosen with precision. Imperial purple for divine rule, sapphire blue for reliability, gleaming gold for prosperity and blessing. Patterns were often intricate codes, readable only to those versed in court symbolism, carrying messages of alliance, warning, or ambition. The tailoring of garments was as practical as it was symbolic. Loose robes created grandeur while masking the figure and concealing hidden tools. Fitted tunics highlighted strength and beauty, while ensuring agility in unpredictable settings. Even clasps and fastenings were designed with dual purposes. Ornamentation on the surface, but escape mechanisms or weapon sheaths beneath. Footwear followed the same principle. Sandals of rare leather balanced luxury with comfort for long ceremonies, while sturdier boots provided protection outdoors. Shoes could carry aromatic herbs that released fragrance as one walked, or metallic inlays that shone brilliantly while also warding off infection. The final accessories completed the ensemble with remarkable subtlety. Fans and parasols were not only climate tools, but coded devices for signaling allies across crowded halls. Perfume containers and cosmetic cases displayed refinement while hiding emergency supplies. Walking staffs and ceremonial scepters stood as symbols of authority, yet doubled as hidden weapons, tools of communication, or escape devices. Their embedded gems were not mere decoration, but intentional placements designed to radiate charisma while reinforcing protection. As this transformation neared completion, the day's strategic briefing unfolded. While attendants perfected the outward presentation, advisors presented intelligence reports and overnight developments. These meetings were never idle talk. They were tactical counsels that shaped the approach to every meeting, every gesture, every word spoken throughout the day. The information feeding these briefings came from one of the most advanced intelligence systems the ancient world had ever seen. Spies, informants, and diplomatic contacts stretching across borders. Fast relay systems carried urgent updates, while early warning networks alerted palace security to dangers or opportunities before they reached the gates. To navigate this torrent of information, leaders required more than sharp intellect. They needed emotional insight to anticipate how their actions would resonate with rival factions, allies, and foreign dignitaries. Thus, the briefings included not only facts, but exercises in mental resilience. Egyptian palace culture understood that successful rule demanded clarity of mind, calmness under pressure, and mastery of social nuance. Meditation practices honed focus and sharpened awareness. Breathing exercises shifted moods within moments, while visualizations strengthened confidence and charisma. Concentration drills built memory and decisiveness in high-stress encounters. Finally, physical exercises sealed the morning transformation movements designed to maintain health, sculpt appearance, and radiate vitality, ensuring that by the time a ruler or courtier stepped into the world, they embodied not just authority, but the perfect integration of body, mind, and spirit. Far from being focused on appearance alone, the physical training undertaken by Egyptian palace dwellers had genuine, practical benefits that could prove crucial in times of uncertainty or danger. For them, maintaining fitness was not about vanity, but about sharpening their bodies into instruments of both political maneuvering and romantic power. Exercises designed to increase flexibility ensured elegant movement and poised posture. Strength training fostered confidence and readiness, while combat drills provided the assurance of survival should diplomatic solutions ever collapse. Even the morning meals carried far deeper meaning than simply satisfying hunger. What began as private rituals of nourishment evolved into highly orchestrated events that set the emotional and political stage for the day. These breakfasts were not casual dining occasions, but carefully structured gatherings where every detail guest list, seating arrangements, menu choices was deliberately chosen to shape the mood and interactions. Each person invited was selected with a strategic purpose. Each place at the table aligned to encourage particular exchanges, and even the food served was calculated to influence energy, focus, and receptiveness. The spaces where these meals unfolded were themselves extensions of palace psychology. Rooms shifted seamlessly from the intimacy of private preparation into arenas ready for public performance. Lighting moved from soft, dawn-like glows to the clear brilliance needed for sharp discussion. The very acoustics transformed starting as gentle, intimate tones for hushed conversation before expanding to suit more formal, authoritative exchanges. Foods were chosen with meticulous care. Exotic fruits that energized without upsetting digestion during lengthy ceremonies. Protein sources that kept minds clear and moods balanced in tense negotiations. and cooking methods crafted to preserve nutrition while leaving a lasting psychological impression. The drinks offered carried equal significance. Light wines were poured to encourage warmth and camaraderie without dulling senses, while herbal teas sharpened mental focus and helped maintain emotional steadiness throughout demanding hours. Even the cups and vessels in which these beverages were served were symbolic, meant to send subtle signals and reinforce key messages that would echo later in the day. The conversations that unfolded around these tables were marvels of subtle diplomacy. On the surface, they appeared friendly, even casual, yet beneath lay refined strategies of intelligence gathering and alliance coordination. Courtiers shared personal anecdotes and private concerns while simultaneously receiving advice, guidance, and tactical direction from their peers. Political matters were interwoven into this social fabric in ways that seemed natural but carried enormous weight. Communication techniques honed over generations allowed sensitive matters to be conveyed through discreet verbal codes, silent gestures, and even the timing of topics, all of which protected security while ensuring efficient knowledge exchange. The transition from these breakfasts to the day's public functions was managed with equal care. What began in relaxed familiarity gradually transformed into formal, structured roles. Yet the bonds forged over food and drink continued to shape decisions, behaviors, and allegiances. Throughout the hours ahead, even the parting moments at breakfast had ceremonial meaning. Warm embraces that reflected both friendship and political unity, gifts that bound recipients into webs of obligation, and carefully staged departures meant to send silent messages to observers within the palace. By late morning, when the palace moved toward public ceremonies and diplomatic meetings, each participant was already finely tuned physically, mentally, and emotionally through hours of unseen preparation. They weren't simply stepping into roles. They were embodying personas designed with precision to maximize their influence. The grand ceremonies of midday and afternoon represented the climax of all this groundwork. Events that appeared effortless and natural were, in reality, the product of hours of planning that began before sunrise. Diplomatic receptions that seemed to be leisurely gatherings were in fact complex exercises in intelligence operations and alliance building. And when night fell, evening entertainments closed the circle. Far from being mere diversions, these occasions allowed intimacy, romance, and personal bonds to feed back into political strategies and plans for the following day. The palaces themselves embodied this blending of art, psychology, and governance. Their design accommodated every aspect of life, from the most visible displays of ceremonial splendor to the most private whispers of personal encounter. Architecture balanced security with openness, grandeur with intimacy. Courtyards and gardens acted as transitional zones, inviting leisurely walks that encouraged reflection and confidential conversation, while cleverly placed pathways provided discreet movement for those needing to slip between duties. Water features offered both beauty and function, masking voices with the sound of flowing streams to shield delicate discussions. Behind the scenes, the support systems of these vast complexes were marvels in their own right. Storerooms overflowed with treasures gathered from across distant lands. Kitchens capable of serving hundreds crafted menus suited to cultural diversity and exacting taste. Laundry and maintenance ensured the palace radiated refinement. Always spotless, always perfect. Housing for staff was planned with as much thought as the royal chambers. Private yet communal. Comfortable yet efficient. Designed to sustain the collaboration of hundreds of specialists. Training centers helped staff perfect their skills, while invisible networks of security operated under the guise of ordinary palace life. Guard stations disguised as decorative features. Surveillance woven into daily tasks. Communication systems hidden in the routines of trade and social exchange, all of it kept the palace secure while appearing natural. The records of these activities were preserved in vast archives. Masterpieces of organization that cataloged thousands of relationships, transactions, and strategies. Systems of cross-referencing uncovered patterns across generations, while encryption methods protected secrets, ensuring only the trusted had access. To maintain such an intricate machine, the palace invested in people as much as structures. Professional development rivaled that of modern institutions. Clear paths of advancement, opportunities for education, and recognition for both individual excellence and teamwork ensured motivation and loyalty. Even provisions for retirement and pensions reflected a sense of lifelong belonging to the palace system. The influence of this elaborate model extended far beyond Egypt's golden age. Thousands of years later, echoes of their methods still guide the modern world. Today's hospitality industries continue to learn from Egyptian ingenuity in crafting unforgettable experiences that blend comfort, psychology, and strategy into a seamless art.